Welcome to Economics session number 2. In this particular session, I'm looking at the price theory. Let's look at some of the ideas we need to explain concerning the price theory. Number 1, we'll look at the concept of a market. We'll look at demand, supply, equilibrium, demand and supply analysis, elasticity of demand, elasticity of supply, price behavior in primary markets, maximum and minimum prices, and the market failure. In this particular video, session number 2, price theory, I'll look at the first 5 ideas in relation to price theory. That is, I'll look at the concept of a market, I'll discuss demand, supply, the equilibrium, and demand and supply analysis. So let's start with the concept of a market. Let's define what a market is. A market is defined as any situation in which potential buyers and potential sellers come together for the purpose of trade or exchange. So what constitutes a market is the presence of potential buyers and the presence of potential sellers who come together for the purpose of trade or exchange. And our major concern under the price theory is to look at how market prices are arrived at. Market prices are arrived at by the interaction of the market forces. What are these market forces? It's the force of demand and the force of supply. So prices in a free market economic system are determined by the strength of the demand and supply. So let's start by looking at demand and then we'll consider supply later. What is demand? Demand refers to the quantity of a good or service that potential buyers would be willing and are able to buy at any possible price. And that's what is called effective demand. So effective demand is described by the presence of the willingness and the ability of potential buyers to buy a particular product at any given price. The law of demand states that as the price of a good falls, then the quantity demanded of that good increases, vice versa. Meaning that if the price of a good is increasing, the quantity demanded of that good will be falling. And that law of demand is clearly expressed by the demand curve. And so we have a downsloping demand curve, and this downsloping demand curve, of course, means that there is an inverse relationship between the price and the quantity demanded. If the price is increasing, quantity demanded must be falling. So for instance, the price increasing from P2 to P1 means that the quantity demanded will be falling from Q2 to Q1. Now let's examine the factors that affect demand. As we look at the factors that affect demand, I want you to look at some factors that affects your own demand. You would agree with me that your demand is highly affected by the price of a good. If the price of a good is high, demand will be low. So if the price of a good falls, the quantity demanded of that good increases. The second factor that affects your demand and my demand is the price of other related goods. Other related goods means these goods may be substitutes or maybe complement goods. What are substitute goods? Substitute goods, these are goods that are used alternatively. These goods are used in place of the other. For example, you can have tea in place of coffee, and the two goods offer the same utility. So substitute products are used alternatively. They are rival goods, but they offer the same utility. You can use this product in place of the other product. So how does the change in the price of one substitute affects the demand for the other? If product A and B are substitutes, an increase in the price of product A will cause the demand for product B to increase as well. An increase in the price of product A causes the quantity demanded of B to increase. Let's say, for instance, tea and coffee are substitutes. An increase in price of tea causes the demand for coffee to go up. Complement products, these are products that are consumed together. For example, um, you have tea and sugar, so those are complement products because they are actually consumed together. Or you have car and fuel, those two are complements because they are also used together. So how does the change in the price of one complement affect the demand for the other complement? If A and B are complements, the increase in the price of A causes the demand for B to fall. The increase in the price of one complement will cause the demand for the other complement to fall. For example, the increase in the price of car means that people will buy less of cars, few cars, and so there will be less demand for fuel as well. The other factor that affect demand is changes in household income. But a change in household income will affect demand for normal goods in a positive way and demand for inferior goods in a negative way. What I mean is this: normal goods, these are good quality products and they are actually bought when people can afford them. Inferior products, these are low quality products and they are actually cheap. They are bought out of conveniency. They are bought when people cannot afford the normal goods. So if there is an increase in the household income, the quantity demanded of normal goods increases. If there is an increase in household income, the quantity demanded of inferior goods falls. So how can we explain a normal good? A normal good is a good whose quantity demanded increases as income increases. An inferior good is a good whose demand falls when income increases. Other factors that affect demand include changes in fashion. We have latest fashion, old fashion. People buy more of latest fashion. We have customer preferences also that can affect demand. The other factor that will affect demand is price expectations. If customers are expecting prices to increase, they buy more now. So if there is an expectation of a price increase, that increases the demand in present. And if there is an expectation of a price fall, that causes demand to fall because customers or consumers will be waiting for the prices to go down before they can buy. The other factor that affects demand is the change in population. An increase in population causes demand to increase, and a fall in population causes demand to fall. The other factor that affects demand, which is not on the list, is advertising. The stronger the advertising, the higher will be the demand. Now let's talk about a movement along the demand curve and the shift of the demand curve. A movement along the demand curve does not change its position, but quantity demanded changes as a result of changes in the prices of a good. And it is only the change in the price of a good that causes a movement along the demand curve. The rest of the factors that affect demand will cause a shift in the demand curve. So price of other goods, household income, price expectation, advertising, changing population will cause a shift of the demand curve. What do we mean by a shift of the demand curve? We mean the demand curve changes its position. For example, if you look at the graph here, the demand curve DO has changed its position to either D2 or D1. If there is an increase in demand, the shift will be a rightward shift to D2. If there is a decrease in demand, the shift will be a leftward shift to D1. And what causes these shifts? Changes in all other factors that affect demand except for the price of a good. The price of a good causes a movement along the demand curve. Let's move on and look at supply. What is supply? Supply refers to the quantity of a good that both existing and potential suppliers would want to produce for the market at a given price. The law of supply states that as the price of a good rises, other things remaining constant, that is ceteris paribus, the quantity supplied of a good will increase. In other words, there is a positive relationship between the price and the quantity supplied. And so we have an upsliding line for the supply curve. Let's look at the factors that affect supply. The number one factor that will affect supply, though not on the list, is the price of a good. According to the law of supply, we are told that if the price of a good rises, the quantity supplied of that good increases. The other factors that will affect supply, quantity supplied, will be the cost of making a good or the cost of production. If the cost of production goes up, quantity supplied falls. The other factors that affect supply is the price of other goods. Other goods means related goods, other related goods such as substitutes and complements. What are substitute products in supply? These are products that are supplied alternatively. If the company can use the same equipment to produce tea and the same equipment can be used to produce coffee, then tea and coffee are substitutes in terms of supply. How does the change in the price of a substitute affect the supply for the other substitute? Let's say A and B are substitutes. The increase in the price of A will cause the quantity supplied of B to fall. The reason is simple: suppliers would love to supply that commodity whose price is high. Complements in terms of supply or production, these are products that are supplied together, products that are produced together. They can either be joint products or byproducts. For example, timber and sawdust. Timber is a product that you are producing, sawdust is a byproduct, but the two are produced together. Those are complements in terms of supply. So let's say if A and B are complements, the increase in the price of B will cause an increase in the quantity supplied of A. The other way we can say that is, if A and B are complements, if there is an increase in the price of A, that will cause the supply for B to increase as well. The reason is very simple. If the price of A increases, producers would love to supply more of A, but because A is jointly produced with the other product, the supply for the other product will also go up. The other thing that affects supply includes government policies on taxes and subsidies. If taxes go up, that increases the cost of production and supply will fall. What is a subsidy? Subsidy is where government tries to pay part of the cost of production to make it easy for producers to produce. So if government applies subsidy on certain products, we expect that the supply for those products will go up. The other factor that affects supply is price expectations. If suppliers are expecting the prices to fall, supply reduces or supply falls in present. The reason is simple: suppliers will be waiting for the prices to become favorable before they can supply. Let me come again on the price expectation. If suppliers are expecting the prices to fall, the quantity supplied increases in the immediate, because suppliers would love to sell while the prices are favorable. If suppliers are expecting the prices to increase, quantity supplied fall in the immediate, because suppliers will be waiting for the prices to go up before they can actually supply. The other factor that affects supply is the change in technology. Technology makes production more efficient, and so producers will produce more when there is an improvement in terms of technology. So an improvement in terms of technology leads to an increase in quantity supplied, vice versa. Other factors that may affect supply include things like weather, natural disasters, industrial disruptions, strikes, and things like that. Weather, more especially for agricultural products. If the weather is favorable, supply will be high. When there is a natural disaster, of course, supply will fall. Again, we need to understand the difference between a movement along the supply curve and a shift of the supply curve. Movement along the supply curve does not change its position, but quantities supplied are changing as a result of the changes in the price of a good. So it's only the price of a good that causes movements along the supply curve. All other factors that affect supply will cause shifts of the supply curve. A shift of the supply curve looks like this. Either the supply curve shifts to the right, meaning an increase in supply, or supply shifts to the left, meaning a decrease in supply. Now let's look at the function of the price mechanism. Prices can be used in the following way. Price can be used as a signaling factor to stimulate response from firms to change production quantities. If the price is low, it is a signal to producers to say they have to reduce supply. If the price is high, it also signals to the producers to increase supply. Price can also be used as a rewarding factor. It's only through charging a price that we can have profits, and profits are used as incentives for firms to respond to changes in prices, of course, and costs. So profits acts as an incentive to firms to encourage them to continue to produce, and of course to reduce the cost of production so that they can make more profits, and that acts as a reward to them for their entrepreneurial efforts. Prices can also be used as a rationing factor. How do we ration the limited resources against unlimited ones? Is by charging a price to it, and the price is charged until only the keenest buyers can afford something. A good example is if I'm selling 2 phones and I've got 100 clients, how do I sell the 2 phones to 100 clients? Is by keeping on increasing the prices until I remain with 2 clients for me to be able to ration the number of phones that I have. Now let's look at the price mechanism and the equilibrium price. What is the equilibrium price? The equilibrium price is a price at which the volume demanded by consumers and the volume that firms would be willing to supply is the same. So with the equilibrium price, there will be no excesses, and so it's called the market clearing price, because at that price you don't have excess, you don't have shortage. But think of it, if we are to charge a price that is different from the equilibrium price, the following will be the results. Let's look at the graph down there. The equilibrium price is PO. This is the price at a point where supply intersect demand, and the QO there should be the equilibrium demand. Forgive this graph because the equilibrium point should be there, but we understand that the equilibrium point is the point where supply and demand intersect, supply line and demand line intersect, and there we have the PO, which is the equilibrium price, and the QO, which is the equilibrium quantity. So let's imagine we set a price that is above the equilibrium price. The following will be the results. If we increase the price above the equilibrium price, quantity demanded will fall, because according to the law of demand, when there is an increase in price, demand falls. And quantity supplied will increase, because according to the law of supply, when there is an increase in price, supply increases. And so the end result will be we have more supply than demand, so there will be excess supply there. And the effect is that this will put pressure on suppliers, and eventually suppliers will begin to reduce the prices for them to sell the excess. If we do the opposite and we set a price below the equilibrium price, say at P2, the opposite happens. According to the law of supply, a decrease in price will cause supply to fall. According to the law of demand, a decrease in price will cause demand to increase. Now we have the opposite problem. Demand has increased, supply has reduced, we have excess demand over supply. The result will be a shortage, and this will put pressure on buyers who begin to offer higher price for them to be able to buy, and so the equilibrium price will bounce back. You can use this same idea to explain government decisions on prices, because government can intervene in the market by setting prices that are different from the equilibrium price. Government can set a price floor which is intended at helping producers to earn a reasonable profit from their output. And so government in this case decides to set a minimum price, which is called a floor price. And so P1 will represent the minimum price. Minimum price is always set above the equilibrium price. And when the minimum price is set, the end result will be excess supply. Government can also set a price that is below the equilibrium price. Of course, when government feels like the market price is too high for some consumers to afford the commodity, more especially essential commodities, government sets a maximum price. So in this case, the maximum price will be at P2. The end result of the maximum price will be a shortage, increase in demand, decrease in supply, and we have a shortage on the market. Now let me talk about consumer surplus and producer surplus, referring to the same equilibrium price. Equilibrium price is the market price, but it's also true that there are some consumers who may be willing to pay a higher price for a product than the equilibrium price. So those consumers that are ready to pay higher price, because the market has dictated this price, they are paying less than they would pay for those products. So what is the consumer surplus? The consumer surplus is the difference between what a consumer may be willing to pay for a product and the actual market price. Same applies to producers. There are producers who may be willing even to produce and supply at a lower price than the equilibrium price, but because they are supplying at the market price, equilibrium price, they are having a surplus. Let's say for instance the market price is 500 kwacha and there are producers who could sell their products for 300 kwacha. They are highly favored by the market price. They will sell at 500 and hence have an excess over what they would have sold if the market price was not at 500. So this brings us to the end of the first part on the price theory. I intend to do another session number 3, talking about the price theory, to cover the other parts of the price theory, such as elasticities of demand and elasticities of supply. But at the same time, I want to encourage you to get a book, Refined Economics. These are the class notes that I've done, and I think they are well summarized, and we have a number of questions to practice there. But at the same time, I'll also do another video that will be attached to this session number 2, and this video will focus on question practice on what we have discussed in this session. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you look forward for that particular video where I will do the question practice on this particular session. Thank you.